In Unit 7, we've been learning about how the U.S. grew and expanded through its belief in manifest destiny, and also through its belief that common people, the common man, could make their lives better through economic opportunity and taking advantage of this expansion. So we're going to conclude Unit 7 with Trails West, Migration, Immigration, and Manifest Destiny. So on this page, we of course see our familiar picture of Columbia leading Trails West and leading Manifest Destiny. Over here we see a flyer advertising steamships to California, and we will learn why people would want to have gone there, especially in this year, 1849. And finally over here we see a picture of what looks like a couple of pioneer families in their wagons, probably heading west. So let's look at our lesson. This is lesson 34, by the way. And our teaks that we can identify westward expansion, that we can put events in chronological order, of course. We can analyze manifest destiny, which we've talked about before. Always we want to be able to locate important places and regions. That we can describe how different immigrant groups interacted with the environment in the 1800s. So that's going to be new, talking more about immigration. That we can identify different groups that settled in the United States and explain why they immigrated. We can identify ways that conflicts with people from different backgrounds were resolved. And finally, we can trace the development of religious freedom as it relates to westward expansion, such as the Mormon migration. We talked about how Lewis and Clark traveled west, exploring the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and 1804. Well, shortly following behind them were the Mountain Men. And like Lewis and Clark, these were tough, resourceful explorers, men like Jebediah Smith and Jim Beckwourth. And they went west seeking furs and beaver pelts to sell to eastern businessmen. They did this because fur and fur-lined hats and clothing items were very popular among the wealthy in the east. So they moved out every summer and came back to trade with what was called the rendezvous system. But in searching for these new beaver pelts, they worked closely with the Native Americans. And this led to exploration and to creating maps of western lands. So their exploration, their discovery, and their maps would be used by others later as they went west. Then we have the Santa Fe Trail, which was opened up in 1821 when Mexico gained its independence from Spain and opened up its territory in New Mexico to American traders. One example of these was William Becknell, who traveled from Missouri to Santa Fe with trade goods. And the result was a profitable trade along this area, and the 800-mile Santa Fe Trail that led through the desert. There were actually two trails, one of which went farther up through the mountains. This was a longer path, but first of all, you avoided the hot desert, and secondly, you avoided going through the Comanche and Kiowa territory here. So this route, while it was shorter, was somewhat harsher and more risky. Then we have the Oregon Trail, which ran from Independence, Missouri, all the way up into the Oregon country, which we've talked about before. So we actually have some special effects here, so enjoy this. And up and around down the Oregon Trail. That was exciting, yes. Now, the Oregon Trail was first traveled by Christian missionaries in 1836, whose goal was to convert the natives of that country. And the result was a great migration in 1843 in which missionary Marcus Whitman brought about 1,000 settlers, beginning an American settlement in Oregon. This is important because this is at the time when America is disputing the Oregon country with Britain, and also about the time that James K. Polk is running for president, in which he said all or none, 54-40 or fight. But the United States, like we learned about previously, acquired the southern half of the Oregon country in 1846 through a peaceful treaty with Britain, in which they simply extended the 49th parallel, 49 degrees north, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Let's talk about the Mormons here for a moment and the Mormon Trail. In New York in 1830, a man named Joseph Smith founded the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and this is a religion whose followers are now known as Mormons. The Mormons had some beliefs which led them into conflict with other religions in the U.S. at the time, and in some cases resulted in them being driven out of their communities. And in 1844, Joseph Smith was attacked and murdered by a group of anti-Mormons. Rest in peace, Joseph Smith. It became a goal of the Mormons to find a place where they could worship in peace and escape persecution, and this fell to their new leader, Brigham Young. And his plan was to establish a Mormon settlement in Utah, which at the time was owned by Mexico. So Brigham Young arranged to buy some land in what was then Mexican Utah, and in 1846, the Mormons in the Mormon migration traveled along from Illinois, along parts of the Oregon Trail, but then they turned south and headed toward Utah instead of north toward Oregon. In 1847, they arrived at the Great Salt Lake, with about 1,600 Mormon settlers. Now, this was a very dry, desert-like climate, so they learned to use irrigation to farm the dry desert soil and built a successful community. Today, Salt Lake City is one of America's largest cities in the West, and Brigham Young had a university, Brigham Young University, which is named after him in Salt Lake City. So for this segment, we hired the Hollywood director, the Transformers director, Michael Bay, to manage our special effects. So here we go. Up and over, down, and there, and to Salt Lake City, and the headquarters of the modern-day Church of Latter-day Saints and the Mormon Tabernacle. So, wow, that was intense. Now, the original plan, since this is a Michael Bay production, the original plan was for the covered wagon to explode when it got to Utah, but the budget ran just a little bit over, so we had to cut that out. So sorry about that. So after that intense experience, I'm sure you may need a time to kind of collect yourself. So at this point, you may want to pause the video, catch a power nap, drink a smoothie, do a little yoga, and when you've got your heart rate down to normal, then please come back and join us and we'll continue. Next, we want to talk about the Irish and the Irish potato famine. In 1845, a crop disease destroyed much of Ireland's potato crop, and potatoes were the main staple food, the main source of diet for the poor of Ireland. So in this famine, and a famine means a loss of food, lack of food, in this famine, about 1 million died from starvation, but another 2 million left the country by 1854 searching for other opportunities, and many of those chose to come to America. So this was a time of great Irish immigration to America. Because they were poor, most of them settled in large northern cities looking for factory work. But some of them also went west, and they found jobs working on railroads and building canals, such as these gentlemen right here, and this little fella right here. Another country that sent a large group of immigrants to the United States was Germany. In 1820 to 1870, German immigration to the United States boomed, and they came because they were seeking to escape economic problems and political conflicts in their home country of Germany. Like the Irish, many of them were poor and settled in large cities in the east looking for factory work, but some of them did have money and they were able to move west and establish farms and farming communities. One of these groups came to Texas during the Mexican immigration period of the 1820s and 30s, and they established the towns of New Braunfels and Fredericksburg here in Texas. Some of the cultural contributions of Germans to the United States include sausage, polka music, Oktoberfest, and one that we have all been through, and that is kindergarten, which literally means in German, children's garden. Let's talk about the California Gold Rush, which was another big draw for immigrants to the United States, and also Americans coming west. Before 1849, California was populated by natives and Californios of Spanish and Mexican descent. And remember, the United States had just recently acquired California in the Mexican cession after the U.S.-Mexican War. A man named John Sutter was given a land grant of around 50,000 acres in the Sacramento Valley, which is in Northern California. And in 1848, at his mill, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill, and news of this discovery quickly spread across the country and actually across the world. So, in 1849, thousands of people traveled to California seeking their fortunes mining gold, as many as 250,000. That's 250,000 people, folks, by 1852. And remember, they're coming to an area that previously had been very sparsely populated. Now, most of these miners were young men. Conditions in the mining camps were harsh. The food was poor, the work was hard, prices were very high, very inflated, there was disease, and few of these men actually struck it rich. Now, some of the ones who did actually get rich were not so much the miners, but the people who supplied the miners, people who built hotels and merchants and shops. And one man named Levi Strauss, who developed a type of pants that was able to hold up against the mining work, and he invented the blue jean. So Levi Strauss was one of the people who did get rich off of the gold rush. So this population boom made California eligible for statehood, and they entered the Union as a free state in 1850. Now you remember they had talked about the Bear Flag Republic before, so that's why we have this Bear Flag picture. And as for this, the reason the 49ers are called, well, the 49ers is this, 1849. And one more immigrant group we want to talk about, and that is the Chinese. Approximately 300 Chinese immigrated looking for work and looking to mine during the gold rush. Now, many of these Chinese, while they did not become rich in the gold rush, they did stay to become workers on the railroads. Now, while they were doing that, they faced low pay, very harsh work conditions, and they experienced a lot of racial prejudice along the way. But they persevered, they continued to work, and as more came and they brought their families, they founded businesses and communities, many of these on the West Coast. Probably the most famous of American Chinese communities is in San Francisco, California, and that is the famous Chinatown. All right, so our lesson 34 thoughts. 1. In what ways did the changing U.S. economy in the mid-1800s contribute to increased foreign immigration? So think about how the things we've talked about in Unit 6 about how the economy was changing, and how did this bring people from foreign countries to the United States? Number 2, list at least 3 pull factors. Remember, a pull factor are positive factors that make people want to move. So list at least 3 pull factors that led different groups to follow trails to U.S. western lands. And finally, number 3, how has immigration in the 1800s continued to influence our lives today? And give at least 2 examples. And that finishes lesson 34 and concludes Unit 7.